Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 8 of my Knights of the Frozen Throne card review. This time around I have 2 new legendaries and 5 more cards beyond that, including some pretty cool stuff, so this is an exciting one. As always, I'm going to be talking about all of these cards at length at the beginning of the video, discussing each of them, their applications and decks, how good they might be, going into a lot of detail. And then after that, I'll be doing some really quick 5-star reviews near the end of the video. If you're just interested in the card reveals and you just want to see my overall take, you can look in the description below for a link to my quick reviews. It'll go much faster, but I hope you'll stick around to hear me talk about these cards because there's a lot to say about these ones in particular. So, all of that said, let's go ahead and jump into my detailed reviews portion of this video. Up first is the new Death Knight hero card for Shaman. This is Thrall Deathseer, a new 5-mana hero card. Really crazy one. Battle cry, transform your minions into random ones that cost 2 more. So this is like double casting Evolve in a single card. It also gives you 5 armor, as do all the Death Knight hero cards apparently. And then once you've played Thrall Deathseer and you become Thrall Deathseer, you get a new hero power too, of course. This one's called Transmute Spirit, and it transforms a friendly minion into a random one that costs 1 more mana. So it's essentially a single targeted evolve on friendly minions. So evolve Shaman synergy like crazy everywhere. So many evolves, right? And a lot of people are reacting really strongly to this card and really positively to this card, saying that this is super powerful. It's going to fit really well in Evolve Shaman. It's going to just be another tool to make an already good deck really, really good. I see that same sentiment. I kind of had that same reaction at first. I do think this is a good card, but, and there's going to be a but, I don't actually think it's quite as good in the token Evolve Shaman thing, the deck right now as we know it, that thing, as it will be in another thing, which is perhaps a slower version of a similar deck that will arrive in Knights of the Frozen Throne. Now, I'm not saying combine this with freezing synergies, but there are, I think, some issues with how Thrall Deathseer works in the deck we know today as token Evolve Shaman, and it's primarily centered around the fact that this hero power, Transmute Spirit, the big problem with it is you can't have your normal hero power as Shaman, which is a really big contributing factor to the success of that deck. Being able to put out a minion every turn super consistently and having that inevitability of just always being able to play a couple things in a given turn and usually even many more and going really wide on the board, that's what makes that deck such a success. It's about those really wide boards where you have 4, 5, 6, 7 minions. So, of course, you can combo them out with really powerful evolves that are very cheap, by the way. They only cost 1 mana, so essentially you can play multiple things and evolve in a single turn. You can also utilize Bloodlust, things like Fling Tongue Totem. All of these cards really benefit from small tokens on the board, including the totems from your hero power. When you move to Transmute Spirit, you're sacrificing that width of your board, and you're making your board taller. Essentially, you're making each minion a little bigger. You're putting more stats into a single card as opposed to spreading your stats out across the board. And also Transmute Spirit, I mean, clearly you're only gaining 1 mana in average value for a minion, and it costs 2 mana to do so. So you're sacrificing a little bit of efficiency with this hero power as well. Not to mention that sometimes when you evolve something, it low rolls and it backfires on you. And if you're not if you're not using an evolve on really low value minions like your totems, it has an even higher potential to low roll or not give you quite as much extended value as you might get from an evolve itself. So in a way, this Transmute Spirit hero power, although clearly an evolve kind of card, I think it has some anti-synergies with the way we know the deck today. So you might have to play the deck a little taller. More about bigger minions, mid-range minions, make it a little less aggressive, maybe play the Jade stuff even more so, lean into Jades harder and supporting cards for Jades so that you can continually transmute Jades into really big legendaries and cool stuff, right? So Again, I think a good card, a lot of this makes sense. The actual Thrall Deathseer card itself, I mean, you're getting a lot of value out of this 5-mana card, right? You're getting multiple evolves, which is worth a couple mana. The armor, of course, is worth a mana or two. So if you do have a nice little board and you're able to play Thrall Deathseer, it's going to be worth it for that instant value. If you have, for instance, 3 things on board and you evolve them twice, that's like gaining an average of 6 mana in stats, because you're gaining 2 mana per 3 minions. It's like 6 free mana worth of stuff on the board, and this is only a 5-mana card, so you can see how quickly that value chain starts to add up with 4 minions, 5 minions, etc. It becomes insane. Even with 2 minions on the board, it's probably still about worth it as far as value is concerned, because it's about a 4-mana gain. The armor's worth 1 mana or so, so it makes Thrall feel like he's not too slow of a play, which I think has been the problem for some of these. But he is, of course, only that good if you have minions on the board. When you're playing from behind, Thrall Deathseer is much worse. Unlike Evolve, where you can often play a ton of stuff and Thrall Deathseer, it's harder to combo multiple pieces together with Thrall Deathseer. So I think I said that backwards. I think I said Thrall instead of Evolve, but you guys probably understand what I mean. So essentially, in other words, yeah, you can still Doppelgangster Thrall Deathseer, but you can't Totem, you can't play anything else alongside it, so it's harder to fit those pieces together and hit those really big Evolve turns with Thrall Deathseer than it might be with some of the cheaper, more flexible cards that are otherwise in the deck. So, again, good card, great effect, seems like it's fine on curve. The hero power is good repeatedly over many, many turns, maybe not that efficient by itself, but again, I just don't think this is perfect for the deck we know today, but it will still be good in other decks. So up next, I have another legendary here, and this one is even crazier than the last. This is the new Priest legendary minion, Archbishop Benedictus, and it is a 7-mana 4/6, nothing remarkable there, but this battle cry: shuffle a copy of your opponent's deck into your deck. So Priest has essentially taken their ability to borrow, copy, and steal their opponent's cards and maxed it out with and they've maxed it out with Archbishop Benedictus, which it turns out is a really difficult thing to pronounce. So, is this card any good, is the question, because clearly it's insane, but is it any good? At first glance, probably not, right? Because there are some problems with copying your opponent's deck and just mixing it into yours. Your deck has very good synergies typically. The cards all fit together. They do the game plan that you're trying to accomplish. And when you steal your opponent's cards and you toss them in, they don't typically line up all that well. You know, you get weapon buffs and you don't have weapons right now, and you get certain spells that don't synergize with your game plan. You get aggressive minions in your control deck probably if you're running Archbishop Benedictus. So typically that's a really, really bad thing. You just decrease the consistency of your card draw. You decrease your internal deck synergies. Now, obviously, the benefit is that you gain like 15, 20 extra cards. So you can be much, much better in a fatigue environment. You have way more resources to work with. So it's much more difficult for decks to actually fatigue you out. It's still probably not a good counter to Jades, simply because Jades just always get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they continue to scale, and your resources don't continue to scale. And Jade cards in particular aren't very good for a Priest, because you'd always be way behind if you're trying to run your own Jade Idols and your opponent's Jade Idols. So this would not be like a fatigue counter to Jade Druid or anything of the sort. But against other control decks, it would definitely keep you from running out of steam if you were to include an Archbishop Benedictus. The question is it worth sacrificing those things I mentioned previously, the quality of your draws, the quality of the synergy of your deck, in order to achieve that game plan? And often I'd say the answer is probably no. But I actually have a kind of alternative idea here for Archbishop Benedictus, which I haven't seen a lot of people talking about yet. And that is essentially that there are ways to build Priest where you can essentially play a ton of cards really, really quickly, and also draw a ton of cards really, really quickly. We've all seen, you know, the Wild Pyro, Northstar Cleric, Circle of Healing turns where a Priest can draw 6, 7, 8 cards in a single turn. And if you're spending those cards really quickly, if those are essentially really low-cost cards, and you're playing for a ton of tempo, you're using Radiant Elementals, Lyra, those kinds of things, to just blow out your hand and try to accomplish as much as possible in the early game, just going all in on removal, playing as much as you can. And then, essentially, if you draw through your entire deck and just vomit it onto the board as much as you can, just continue to cycle, then you could actually use Archbishop Benedictus as sort of a backup plan, where it's like, okay, I've gone all in, my opponent has still outvalued me because I haven't made the most efficient plays, or my cards just don't go that far for pure value because I've decided to play these really low cost and aggressive cards in Priest, of all places, and now, since I'm out of gas, and I'm going to run out of my deck, I'm just going to play Archbishop Benedictus to get 20 additional cards, because even though I've played 20, my opponent has only played 10. I'm going to steal the remaining 20 cards, and now I essentially have a backup gas tank where I can continue to play more cards, and you still probably are able to cycle through a lot of those cards because your deck is so full of card draw. So if there's a way for Priest to do that, just using all those really cheap cards, cycle really powerfully, which I'm not saying that there is necessarily. It'd be really hard to build a tight deck list to support this kind of play, but I can see some potential line where Archbishop Benedictus serves as a refiller kind of card in that environment. So I haven't totally given up hope on this card. Clearly, the memes are real. You're going to be able to do some fun, stupid stuff with this card. Day 1 of Knights of the Frozen Throne, I'll probably be the first person doing it. So at a surface level, that doesn't look competitive. It looks fun, which is great. It's a fantastic design. Takes Priest to the max level. I love all of that about it. Typically not very good, though. But I do see that other line of strategy where maybe this could actually be halfway decent in the right kind of build. So I have some hope for Archbishop Benedictus. And I think I said his name halfway right that time. Okay, so now we have another Priest card. This time a spell at 6 mana called Embrace Darkness. And this one allows you to choose an enemy minion, and then at the start of your turn, you take control of that minion. So it's sort of a delayed mind control at a lower cost. You could also probably compare this card to Entomb, where you take a minion for 6 mana, those kinds of things. But unfortunately, unlike each of those cards, I think this one has some major downsides that makes it much harder to work successfully. And Mind Control is already a card that's a little tough to work with. The problem for Embrace Darkness is a couple things, right? So the fact that you get the minion at the start of your turn, that essentially means that your opponent has an entire turn where they get to do whatever they want with the minion. So if you cast Embrace Darkness on it, they can start making value trades to try to get something out of it. They can try to kill it before you actually get it back, because at that point, if they make a trade that sacrifices it, there you go. So it's going to be hard to pick the right target, and it's going to be hard to deny your opponents opportunities to actually not still get some value out of it. Worst case scenario, worst case scenario for them, they might just be able to hit you in the face for an additional 6 damage if you cast Embrace Darkness on their Tyrion, right? Like, they're probably going to get something out of the minions still. So it's not the perfect removal because they get time and they get ways to utilize it still. And then the second problem with this card is that even after you steal the minion, say you cast it on that Tyrion, your opponent hits you for 6, then you get the Tyrion back, you're not able to attack with it because you didn't summon it until the start of your turn had already begun. So it doesn't get to attack until the next phase, assuming they don't code in some sort of special interaction where you do get to attack with it, but that would be very unusual. It wouldn't follow the mechanics of the rules of Hearthstone as we understand them now. It's not like a card like Potion of Madness where it's on your own turn. It's delayed, so most likely, my guess is 99%, you won't be able to attack with it, right? So it also just sits there and it takes you another turn to actually get to utilize it. So there's a lot of essentially resources going into this card before it actually pays off, a lot of time going into this before it pays off, and then even when it does pay off, how much is it worth, right? What minion are you able to steal that really pays you back? I think the best targets in the game for this are things that have some sort of default value that don't have to attack right away to get value. So actually Tyrion's a pretty good example since it has taunt. Your opponent still has to deal with the body. You still might get the weapon that same turn to get to attack. Those kinds of things, right? So, or at least the next turn, you'll still get some value back. Cards like Ysera, for instance, that have an end-of-turn effect where you'll still get to draw the card, even if you don't get to attack with Ysera and she has long-term value. Those kind of targets work really well. Simple statted minions, just stealing like a 6/6 or something wouldn't feel very good because you're giving your opponent time to work with that 6/6, make trades, you don't get to attack with it, it just sits there for a turn. So it's going to have to be a really slow meta for this card to work at all, and even then I think there are probably just better options and better resources for Priest and better cards to run in this slot that are a little bit more proactive and a little bit faster to work than Embrace Darkness. Now that said, this could still fit in the right metas. the right kind of environment, it's not terrible. It's cheap removal, but it just has a lot of downsides to make it really successful as a fitting card for Priest. They just have so much other stuff that can work well. So I don't think this is the new Entomb. I don't think this is Mind Control Light even. I think Mind Control is still a pretty viable card to run, particularly with things like Medivh in your deck. So to me, Embrace Darkness is close. It's not the worst card I've ever seen, but it is going to come up short. So now let's move on to a Druid card called the Crypt Lord. This is a new 3-mana, 1/6 minion with Taunt, and it has an effect after you summon a minion, you gain +1 health. So, you can start comparing this to things like Silverback Patriarch, clearly 1,000 times better than Silverback Patriarch because it has 2 extra health by default and can gain even more. Also, Tar Creeper is a pretty popular 3-mana taunt right now, but clearly Tar Creeper has one big advantage over the Crypt Lord, and that is that it has 3 attack on your opponent's turn. And that, to me, is the big downside with Crypt Lord, right? It only has 1 attack on your opponent's turn, or on your own turn, right? So it can never actually make that many efficient trades against, small to mid-sized minions. They often have 2 or 3 health. So essentially, yeah, it slows opponents down, it gets in the way, but they never actually die. So you have to find other resources, other ways to actually resolve those minions on the board. So Crypt Lord has some issues there. As a defensive tool, I don't think it's that good. I think you'd rather just run Tar Creeper, because even if you give this thing 7, 8, 9, 10 health, it still isn't actually doing enough to set up trades. It's just not strong enough as a 1-attack minion. 1-attack taunts just don't do the job. That's what makes Tar Creeper so great, is that it bounces up to 3 on your opponent's turn, trades into so many extra things. So Crypt Lord, as a defensive tool, I think is just objectively worse than Tar Creeper. But, I don't think you use Crypt Lord as a defensive tool. I think this card is a token Druid's dream. I think you run this in aggressive token Druids, not as a defensive card. Token Druids have already picked up on the fact that if you slot a Tar Creeper into your deck, it works really well. It can protect all of your smaller stuff. It can protect your big assets like the Vicious Fledglings, for instance, in Token Druid, because it's just hard for your opponents to get through. And the fact that it only has 1 attack on your turns isn't that bad for an aggressive deck because Token Druid runs so many buffs. They run Mark of the Lotus, Power of the Wild, etc. So you can easily bump it up to a 2-attack, 3-attack minion and still apply pressure to the face if your opponent isn't killing your Tar Creeper. So the downsides of a low-attack minion are much smaller in a Token Druid deck. So you get the utility of the defense, and you have the potential upside of making it a viable attacking, pressuring minion, which isn't possible without those buffs. Crypt Lord fits into the very same role. You can buff it up to a 2-attack minion, a 3-attack minion, etc. And it continues to gain a ridiculous amount of health in a token deck that's all about summoning multiple minions. So for instance, if you play this on turn 3, it's going to be almost impossible for most decks to kill a 6 health minion on turn 3. And then if you follow up with 2, 3, 4 minions the next turn, it's going to be 8, 9, 10 health. And then a couple more minions the following turn, they're never actually going to be able to kill this thing. It's just constantly going to be in the way, causing them problems without some sort of really strong single target, hard removal option. And if they're spending that much, as far as resources and mana is concerned, on a 3-mana minion, that also puts you in a good spot. So I can see this thing becoming a ridiculous snowball card in aggressive Token Druid decks. Tar Creeper has already led the way down that path. I think Crypt Lord fits even better. So although at first glance this looks like a defensive card for defensive decks to help Druid stabilize early, I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think it's good enough in that role. But in an aggressive token deck, this thing is actually really scary. I think this is a very strong card in that environment, and I think it's going to actually feel a little bit busted a lot of the time. So clearly a bit split here about how you play this card, how good it becomes, but in that right environment, a scary, scary card to me. And now to finish this review, we'll run through a couple, or actually a few new neutral cards, starting off with the Sunborne Valkyr. This is a new 5-mana neutral minion, of which we need some. We've already seen one. This is another one. This one's a 5/4 minion with the battle cry, give adjacent minions +2 health. So, in the vein of things like Defender of Argus, but unfortunately not nearly as good as Defender of Argus in my eyes. Although, yes, clearly a higher stat allocation than Defender of Argus, a much more aggressively statted card. The fact that this doesn't actually give any attack value to minions is a really significant downside. Also, the fact that it doesn't give any taunt to minions is another big downside. So I think a lot of the times decks that would want to run Sunborne Valkyr would probably just rather run Defender of Argus because of its increased utility. Now, I do think this will be a strong arena card. It looks very good for arena in particular. It's not unplayable constructed, don't get me wrong. Obviously, health buffs can be very valuable setting up trades. Priest in particular has very successfully utilized health buffs in a lot of different ways. So maybe this could be slotted into a Priest deck if you're running, multiple minions on the board all the time. It has some clear synergies. The real problem for me with Sunborne Valkyr is that 4 health is not that strong for a 5-drop. It dies to a lot of extra things. If this were a 4 or 5, I actually think it'd be considerably better, because typically if you're giving minions +2 health and that's what your deck wants to do, you're typically looking for ways to get minions with big health and build a sturdy board, more defensively statted kinds of things, and this is flipped. So it doesn't necessarily synergize with the kind of deck you'd want to run it in my eyes. So I don't know that this is a perfect fit or a perfect synergy card, even in those decks that do, some reason or another, want plus health on their minions. So even though you do get a total of 5/8 in stats for 5 mana here, and some of those stats have Battlecry, which is always nice, I still think this card just has trouble slotting into the right environments. So Sunborne Valkyr, again, another one of those cards nothing wrong with. Interesting design. I like that it reinforces good positioning habits. All that's great, but just not probably strong enough to beat out other cards at its mana cost in the decks that need this kind of thing. So now we've got the Phantom Freebooter, a new pirate minion. It's 4 mana, 3/3, and it has Battlecry. Gain stats equal to your weapon's stats. So it's a 3/3 by default. If you have a Fiery War Axe equipped and you've never attacked with it, then this becomes a 6/5 minion for 4 mana. And hey, that's actually pretty solid. If you have just a N'Zoth's First Mate Rusty Hook equipped, then unfortunately this just becomes a 4/4, which isn't nearly so good for 4 mana. In fact, it's pretty understated for 4 mana. Clearly, there's all kinds of variations here. Arcanite Reaper, that's an 8/5. That's pretty good. But the downside here, I think, for this card is the problem that weapons almost always, at least especially in decks that run pirates, almost always have lower durability than they do attack. So this minion's always going to have a fairly low health total. So, especially because you don't typically hold weapon charges in the more aggressive decks that tend to run pirate synergy. So you use that first charge of the Arcanite Reaper immediately because you can't just sit around on it all day. So this only gains 1 health instead of 2. Clearly there are upgrade cards that can change that. You can get those 2/4 upgraded hooks, and this could suddenly be a 5/7 minion for 4 mana, and that's kind of crazy, scary good. So I think there is potential for this to be run in a Pirate Warrior deck. I think kind of stats per attack efficiency compared to Bloodsail Raider, this is far worse because you get the same attack value as you do with a Bloodsail Raider with this card, but it costs twice as much mana. So I don't think it's nearly as strong as an aggressive, scary, face-style pirate deck as a card like Bloodsail Raider. So I'm not sure this would make the cut in that particular environment. Maybe if you ran a pirate deck that was a bit more mid-rangey and a bit more about upgrades and really strong weapons and a bit more board-oriented but still had a lot of pressure, this card could fit a little better. But the other thing to consider with this card is pirates don't just go in Warrior, and this is a neutral card. What about Doomhammer, for instance? What happens when this is an 8 durability weapon with Phantom Freebooter? Then you have a 5/11 for 4 mana. That's a pretty good minion, guys. That's a meaty guy, or I should say a meaty ghost pirate in this particular instance, for a 4 mana minion. There's also, I think Rogue Pirate has been really close with like Lucky Do Buccaneers and some of the other pirate cards available to Rogue, Swashbucklers, etc. And with the weapon stuff happening in Rogue, maybe Phantom Freebooter fits in that world where you've got like a weapon buff Rogue Phantom Freebooter deck that's a little more mid-range. So keep an eye out on this card. Has the potential to fail a lot of the times if you don't have a good weapon equipped, or you just have the rogue hero power equipped. It's just a Yeti, right? Like, it's a risky card without much consistency in some cases. Does have a lot of upside, though, in other cases. So it could be a game swinging, 4 mana, 7/7 kind of card. So Keep an eye out on Phantom Freebooter. This card could do some stuff. I don't think it necessarily fits perfectly in Pirate Warrior as we know it today, and that's the most obvious inclusion. So keep an eye out there too, but watch for it carving out a spot in some other decks here and there. This is not a bad card for weapon classes in particular. I kind of like Phantom Freebooter. This could be a card we see a lot more of. Okay, so now let's move on to the final card in this review. It is the Mindbreaker, a new 3-mana 2/5 minion with a really cool effect, actually a pretty strong effect at that for just a neutral rare minion. It's that hero powers are disabled, so nobody gets to use their hero power while Mindbreaker is on the board. And this is also a 2/5 minion, which is a really nice stat allocation for 3 mana. We've seen many successful 2/4 minions at the 3 spot before. 5 health is really difficult to deal with at 3 mana or on turn 3 as well. So there's a lot to like about this card. Now, is disabling hero powers actually that strong of a play? Probably not most of the time, right? Most of the time, your opponent, particularly on turn 3, is going to have other stuff to do, other cards to play. Hero powers aren't that impactful ever in any given turn for the standard hero powers. But, of course, there are 6 Death Knight hero cards yet to be revealed. We've seen a few. They all have crazy strong hero powers so far. In a world where Death Knights are a big part of the meta, Mindbreaker starts to look better and better if you're disabling really strong hero powers, or there's one dominant Death Knight class and their hero power is really oppressive. This could be the kind of tech card that gets slotted in that becomes really important. It has the stats necessary to be a successful tech card. It's not limited by its stats like many tech cards are. So this seems like a card that is a good thing to have around, a good thing to have on hand, just in case we need to counter some sort of oppressive Death Knight hero power or any other hero power. So, not an everyday card, not an every deck kind of card, certainly not an every meta kind of card, but still the kind of card that has enough utility and the right numbers for it to make sense in certain places. Okay, so that wraps it up for my long format review. A lot of crazy stuff in that series, like a lot of cool cards and some neat effects. I'm really happy with Blizzard's design philosophies so far in this expansion. I think they're doing a lot of things right. I don't think necessarily every card is great or meta-defining by any means, but that's okay. They're fun, they're interesting, they're going to be fun to see on the ladder. Nothing feels like too random or too oppressive so far, so I'm pretty excited to actually play these things. All that said, what I'd like to do now is jump into some quick 5-star reviews in which I'll rate each card from 1 to 5 stars on just how good I think it's going to be in standard format. So let's go ahead and jump into these quick reviews. Starting off with Thrall, Deathseer. I think this is a 4-star card, but not for the deck that everybody thinks is a 4-star card for. I think it'll carve out its own unique iteration of Evolve. Probably not Token, but Evolve mid-range Shaman, but still 4-star card. I think Archbishop Benedictus is a 2-star card. Clearly, as far as fun is concerned, he's a 5-star card, but for quality, competitive play, I think just a 2-star card. I think Embrace Darkness is also a 2-star card, only ever going to be used in fringe situations, not a consistent piece of priest removal arsenal. I think Crypt Lord is a 4-star card specifically for token druid decks. I don't think he'll be that great of a defensive tool for druids. I think Sunborne Valkyr is a 2-star card. Nothing wrong with it, just not going to be consistently played a lot. Phantom Freebooter is actually a 3-star card. There's some potential for this one to make waves in the right kinds of decks. It has the stat per mana cost to make some sense in decks that can support it. I think Mindbreaker is a 3-star card. It's just a nice little tech card that's not going to be a part of every deck, but could, from time to time, be played consistently enough to make it good to craft and to have on hand. And there you go, guys. That is my Part 8 Knights of the Frozen Throne card review. This is one of my favorite ones yet. Archbishop Benedictus is insane. The Thrall Death Knight's pretty cool, too. A lot of interesting designs, as I already mentioned. So I'm curious what you guys think as well. Did you like these cards? What do you think they're going to work for? Are they going to work at all? Let me know in the comments below, because I always love to hear your take on all these cards. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.